All right, I don't want to drown you in politics this week, but bear with me. I do want to go back to last week's Queensland Local Government elections for a bit. There's another important lesson for Conservatives and classical Liberals to take away from it all. It was a disaster for the Labor Party of massive existential proportions, but a huge boost and a positive tick for the LNP. What's important is that the LNP take the right message from it, not the wrong one. Local council elections would normally be a big yawn outside the Sunshine State, except for two reasons this time around. Brisbane City Council is now the largest government held by the Liberal Party in Australia, governing 1.2 million people, half of Greater Metro Brisbane. And there were two state by-elections that were held at the same time as the local council elections, and those by-elections yielded unexpectedly bad results for the ALP. So these elections sent mixed messages to Queensland's United Liberal National Party, the LNP, which, if they are interpreted badly by the party's strategists, could lead them in completely the wrong direction in the upcoming state and federal elections we're going to have in the next year or so. The two state by-elections were caused by the resignations of two MPs. Former Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, who previously held the outer southwestern Brisbane working class electorate of Inala, and the member for Ipswich West in the Labor heartland satellite city to Brisbane's immediate west. The swing against Labor in Inala was around 30% against Labor's primary vote. And that can be kind of explained away by the loss of a prominent political figure like Palaszczuk, and it wasn't completely unexpected. Inala's been retained by the ALP though, so strong was Palaszczuk's margin to begin with. But the story in Ipswich is disastrous for Labor and for Palaszczuk's successor, Stephen Miles.
Stephen Miles concedes his government faces wipeout in October if last night's by-election results are replicated statewide. In a horror night for the Labor Party, it looks to have lost the heartland seat of Ipswich West.
I was expecting a bad result, and they're even worse than that.
That's how 9 News reported it. The swing against Labor in Ipswich West was 15% on the primary vote and almost 18% after you do the two-party preferred thing. That's absolutely massive. To put it in perspective, the recent Melbourne by-election in the federal seat of Dunkley was a slightly larger than average swing, but it was only 3 to 4%. So what does all this tell us? Well, the LNP had a very good night with success in both the council elections. The Lord Mayor of Brisbane was returned, and they might increase their council chamber numbers despite the Greens' surge in primary votes and Labor's existential crisis. And they had huge positive swings in both those state by-elections. But here's the rub. The good result in the council election and the good result in the by-elections were for two completely different kinds of reasons with two very different kinds of voters. And the LNP strategists do have a tendency to like to apply what works in Brisbane City to state and federal elections because they think that Brisbane City Council is their big golden shining light of the party. And that is a huge mistake, one they need not to make in the state election in October this year like they did the last state election, nor should they make it in the federal election that's going to follow in the months after that one. The recent wins by libertarian and conservative non-left-wing parties around the world, especially in left-wing leaning Europe, has been heavily reliant upon a rejection of modern leftist elitism by working-class non-university educated people. This cultural and political split between inner metro and outer metro Australians was really writ large on Saturday in Queensland. The inner city university educated voters continued their long march to the Greens in the Brisbane City Council election. And this happened despite, as we said earlier, the radicalism of a Green Lord mayoral candidate who'd openly called for squatting and shoplifting. The Greens collected almost 20% of the primary vote citywide. The Greens came worryingly close to victory in 4 of the council's 26 seats. It looks like they're going to finish with just 2, with nearly all their gains at the expense of poor old Labor. The LNP held on to power by playing a clever teal-like strategic game of being very green in their policies as a city council and in the way that they approached the election. But the state by-election results send a very, very different message with a different kind of voter. Outer city and satellite city voters. The good results for the LNP in Inala and Ipswich West make it clear that Peter Dutton's strategy of favouring the outer metro conservative working class who are struggling with the cost of living crisis, who are rattled by crime and who are fed up with cultural wokeism is actually the right strategy. A firm focus on the issues that matter for the aspirational middle class rather than any ideological shift to the left to appease inner city elites like they had to do in the city election will be critical to succeed in the state and federal election. It's what caused the political isolation and decline of the Labor Party. The elite of the ALP are fixated on woke nonsense that's got nothing to do with the real concerns of people who are trying to bring up their families and pay the bills. So the message of Saturday for the Liberal National Coalition nationwide seems very clear. The pragmatic suburban green strategy of bikeways, parks and gardens will work in the inner cities, but any temptation to hold that Brisbane City Council as a shining template of how elections are won and try to apply that to a state and federal strategy is doomed to fail. The people who inhabit our outer suburbs are smart as a whip. They know inflation is caused by big government overspending and that high taxes will only worsen the problem. They understand the need to back small business. They reject all things woke and they hold traditional Australian family values. Focus on the outer suburbs and cities like Ipswich and Inala, where people are abandoning Labor in droves, but are voting Liberal, not Green, instead.